Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we'll be discussing about the key-based authentication. Now before we go ahead and discuss more about it, let's start from basics and understand more about password-based authentication. Now the password-based authentication is something that I'm sure you already know because this is something that we use in our laptops to log in. Now again, one important part to remember is that there are multiple methods for authenticating against the system. Password based authentication is the simplest form of them. So what generally happens in this kind of a method, we can understand this with a server based architecture where you have a Linux server and you have a laptop. So when you try to log into a server, so here you are specifying the username as admin, then you will also have to supply the password because here you see the server has asked you what is the password associated with the admin user, and only after you enter the password will you be able to log in to the server. Now this form of authentication we have already seen in our laptops and the same applies for the servers as well. Now there are certain challenges with the password based authentication. First one is that the password based authentication is generally considered to be less secure. Now what really happens many a times, specifically if you're working in organization, specifically into the security team, you'll find that a lot of users are writing down their password in a notepad file or as part of the sticky note, something similar to what you see within this diagram. In fact, I'll give you an example because many years back, I used to work as a system administrator in one of the organizations in Mumbai. And we used to come early in the morning specifically to go into each and every desk to see if the user has written down the password behind their keyboard or not. And we had seen that around 70 to 80% of the time, the keyboard would have that sticky note which contains the password. So that is one of the challenges that you will typically see with password based authentication. And also the third challenge is that most users would not really create a complex password, because when you create a complex password, it is difficult to remember. You might have to use an external password manager and so on. And if they make use of a simple password, then it is much more easier to hack into. So in order to overcome that specific scenarios of password based authentication, a new type of authentication called as key based authentication is introduced. Now one important part to remember here is that a server can contain a lot of sensitive data. It can contain credit card, debit card information and other PII data as well. And you do not want this server to be hacked, primarily because some user has set a very simple password for his user in the server. So generally, if you look into the production environments, password based authentication for servers is something that you will rarely see. So coming to a stronger authentication type, that is key based authentication. So in this type of authentication, there are two special keys that are generated. One is called as a public key and second is called as the private key. So this can be better understood with the diagram where you have a Alice user and there are two keys that are generated. One is the public and second is the private key. Now the idea behind key based authentication is that if public key is stored in the server and if you are making use of key based authentication, then only the corresponding private key can be used to successfully log into the server. So let's say Alice user has generated her own key. So when you generate key, there will be two keys that will be generated. And if this public key is stored in the server, then Alice can only log into the server with the corresponding private key. So again, this can be better understood with this diagram here, where you see that one key is stored in the Linux server and second key is stored in the laptop. And whenever a user wants to log into the server, the user will have to make use of this private key as part of the authentication mechanism. So that's the high level overview about the key based authentication. Now, this specific key is something that is not really very easy to remember. So in fact, let me quickly show you this. So currently I am in my Linux box and you will see that there are two keys that are available. One is the public key over here, which is generally stored at a server level, and second is the private key. Generally, if you want to log into the server, you will be making use of this private key. This private key always stays within your laptop and you do not share it with anyone. So if I would have to show you the private key over here, this is what the private key looks like. And since this is so long, no one is going to add it as part of the sticky note. So this is one of the great advantage of using a key-based authentication. Now, one very important part to remember here is that depending upon the cloud provider, you might or you might not be able to use password-based authentication. So let me give you one example here. So I have a cloud provider account within the DigitalOcean, and let me quickly show you the step for creating a server. So when you create a server, if you go a bit down within the authentication, you see that there are two types of authentication methods that are available. One is based on password and second is based on the SSH keys. Now within the password, you see it already states that it is less secure and the SSH keys are generally selected by default. However, when you discuss about AWS, for Linux servers, you only have the key-based authentication which is available. So that's the high-level overview about the authentication types. So now let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and create our first key in AWS. So I hope you have registered for the AWS account. Now once you have registered for the AWS account, you would typically see a welcome email, something similar to this. So this is the subject of the email that you would receive. Now within this email, there is a hyperlink. So you see when you click on this AWS Management Console link, it will take you to the login page in AWS. So this is one of the ways in which you can log in. Let me quickly show you this. So when you click here, you will see a page something similar to this. So this is basically the sign-in page. Now, in case if you have not received this email, then also there is one more way in which you can fetch this sign-in link. Now within Google, when you type AWS Management Console, you will see a page similar to this. So you can go ahead and click here. Always verify if it is directing to aws.amazon.com. So once you click here, there is an option of sign in to the console. So you can click here, or you can go to my account and you can click on AWS Management Console. Both of them will do the same thing and will direct you to the same page. So let's do one thing. Let's quickly log in via the credentials for which you have created the AWS account. Now once you have added the email address, you can click on next. And then you can go ahead and add a password here. Once done, you can click on sign in. So now we are signed in to the AWS Management Console over here. Now, as we know that there are multiple regions that are available. Now the region in which you want to create a server, in that region you will also have to create a key. So you can decide to use one of the regions which is closer to your location. So once you have decided that, you can go to services and you can click on EC2. Now within here, if you go a bit down, there is a dedicated section called as key pairs over here. And from this section, you can go ahead and generate the key. Now you do not have to generate the key from the command because AWS does that for you. All you have to do is you have to click on create key pair and you have to give a name for the key pair. So for example, let's call it as EC2-key. Now, one very important part to remember here is there are two file formats that are available. One is PEM and second is PPK. Now both of them are basically the key, but they are of different format. So in case if you are making use of Mac or if you are making use of MobiXterm, then you can make use of this PEM format. In case if you are using a tool called as PuTTY, In fact, let me quickly show you this. So this is a tool called as putty over here. This is a very famous tool in Windows. So in case if you are making use of this tool, then you can make use of the PPK format. However, since we'll be making use of the OpenSSH based client like MobaXterm, we'll be making use of PEM. Again, if you are using Mac, PEM is the right format. So once you are done, you can then click on create key pair. Now note that as soon as you have created a key pair, automatically a key got downloaded within the browser. So that key is nothing but this private key which is automatically downloaded. So this is the key that you always keep it with yourself. Never share this key with anyone, because through this key you will be logging in to the servers that you will be creating in AWS. Now, before we conclude, let me quickly show you one interesting thing. Now, this is primarily because AWS, it keeps on updating this GUI. So earlier, in fact, let me go to the older console experience. So earlier what used to happen was there used to be only one option. So when you click on create key pair, all you do is you give a name. So let's give a name and you do a create, and automatically a key gets created for you. Now within the older console, you never get asked whether a key for PPK is required or PEM based format is required. However, for the newer console, you have that option that is available. So again, just remember this specific aspect. So that's the high level overview about the key based authentication. Again, we are discussing at a very high level overview in the most simplistic terms. I still remember in my college final year, we used to have a dedicated subject called as cryptography and network security. And in there, we used to study in detail about the key-based authentication and how it works behind the scenes. It is very interesting part. However, for today's video and for this course, that is something that we are not interested in. All we are interested in is how to go ahead and create our own key within AWS, and then at a later stage, we'll look into how we can create our first EC2 instance, also referred as the first server within AWS. So that's the high level overview. I hope this video has been informative for you, and I look forward to see you in the next video.